We are now less than 1 week away from the start of the 2025 IndyCar season, and I could not be more excited. IndyCar may be my favorite motorsport series, topping Formula One. So I wanted to make this video as an intro to IndyCar for any new fans that are looking to get into these series. This is an especially great time to become a fan of IndyCar, especially if you have been an F1 fan. Will Buxton is leaving F1 TV and coming to IndyCar to be the lead commentator. He's also joined by James Hinchcliffe, who you might have noticed he has been on F1 TV a few times. They are also joined by Townsend Bell. He and James Hinchcliffe have worked together on the IndyCar broadcast over the last few years. They do an amazing job. If you're an F1 fan, there's honestly no reason to not like IndyCar. If you're over here thinking, oh, well, Marcus Ericsson did not do good in F1 and he's won an Indy 500, almost won too, obviously it must mean IndyCar is a lower series. No, they are simply different. So in this video, I'm going to give you a crash course and overview of IndyCar. This is IndyCar 101, if you will. I'm going to be going over all of the main topics I think you need to know to understand an IndyCar race weekend and the championship. So as a quick overview, IndyCar is an American open wheel racing series. It is a spec series, which means they all race the same chassis, which is basically the body of the car. And they race on ovals, street tracks, and road courses. So there's a variety of circuits you can see them race on. It is very fun. It gives a lot of variety in the racing. And again, there are quite a few key differences that differentiate it from F1, and so that's what I'm going to get into today. First, I'm going to tell you about the team structures and introduce you to the teams and their drivers. The team structures are a very key difference in the way IndyCar and F1 operates. In F1, you have 10 teams. Each team has 2 drivers. They operate as a team with just 2 separate cars. In IndyCar, the cars themselves act as separate teams. They have their own personnel. Of course, there is the oversight of the team, but they have their own pit crew. They have their own pit stall specifically. In F1, they have the same mechanics and pit stall that they all do their pits in. In IndyCar, they are separate for each car. They all have their own strategy. Now, the teams will tell you that they don't do team orders. That's not necessarily true. They're never gonna explicitly say, hey, do this. But of course, the teams are looking out for each other. So in theory, the teams have an unlimited amount of cars. However, as the charter has been introduced this year in 2025, each team can only have 3 charters. What the charter is, it is essentially a guaranteed entry into every single race except the Indy 500. The Indy 500 operates pretty differently than all of the other IndyCar races. I'm not going to touch on that too much in this video. I will do an Indy 500 explainer closer to. I'm not going to touch on the charters too much more than that because this is their first year in practice. We're going to see a lot of what the charters are about this coming year. And the only teams to not have a charter is Prema. And so we're going to see how that actually has to play out. Don't think too hard about it right now. We're all figuring that out together. But so in practice, in theory, they can have an unlimited amount of cars. In practice, only 3. And so now every single team has 2 or 3 cars. In the past, we'd had 4 or even 5 cars per team. With Chip Ganassi specifically, they love to have a lot of drivers. They've cut that down this year, obviously, because of the charter. But that is a big difference in how IndyCar operates. There are variable amounts of drivers per team. Now we will get into the teams and their drivers for the 2025 IndyCar seasons as it stands. So Chip Ganassi Racing, they are a very good team. They have won the Drivers' Championship the last couple of years. They have Kiffin Simpson. This is his 2nd year in IndyCar. They have Scott Dixon. You may have heard of him. He is kind of, I don't want to say he's the Lewis Hamilton of IndyCar because that's kind of disrespectful to both of them, but he's a 6-time IndyCar champion. He's that guy. If there's ever a fuel saving strategy, which we'll get into, he will win the race. And he's just like, he'll do things and you're like, how the hell did Scott Dixon do that? But it's Scott Dixon, so he did it. They have Alex Palou. He has won the IndyCar championship 3 times in 2021, 2023, and 2024. So he is the reigning champion. He kind of wins everything. Currently, he is the most comparable to Max Verstappen. If you're kind of wondering who's going to run the race, probably Alex Palou. However, he has not won an Indy 500, so he will be definitely trying for that this year. You also know Alex Palou because he was a reserve driver and maybe going to drive for McLaren, and then that didn't happen, and now they are in a legal battle. Speaking of McLaren, we have Arrow McLaren. You know them because they have Pato O'Ward. He is also a reserve driver. He has done a few rookie sessions for the McLaren F1 team. Then we have Nolan Siegel. This is his first full season. He got swapped in last year after David Malukas had injured his hand. If you are and then we're not even going to get into that because there were so many different drivers that took that seat temporarily. Nolan Siegel kept it in the end. And then we have Christian Lundgaard. He was in F2. He's been over in IndyCar for the past couple of years. AJ Foyt Racing, we have David Malukas. We love David Malukas. They also have Santino Ferrucci. I'm not going to comment on Santino Ferrucci. Prema, this is our new team. They have Robert Schwartzman and Callum Ilott, both of which have competed in F2. You'll know Robert Schwartzman. Well, actually, both of them were in the Ferrari Driver Academy. This is their first year over here. Well, sorry, this is Robert's first year. Callum has been here a few years now, but he didn't get a full-time seat last season, which we were all very sad about, and we're excited for him to come back. Then in Lucas Hollinger, we have Stingray Robb, and we have Connor Daly. Stingray Robb, I believe this is his second full-time season, and Connor Daly has been bouncing around a lot. He's been in IndyCar, he's been out of IndyCar. It looks like he'll be here for the full season this year. Team Penske, Chip Ganassi and Team Penske are the top two teams. I would say Arrow McLaren and Andretti, who we will talk about next, is below that, and then there's a lot of variability below that. So Team Penske has Joseph Newgarden, who I'm sure you have heard of. He has won the Indy 500 the last 2 years in a row. He's incredible on ovals. You would bet on Alex Palou on every other circuit but at ovals. You're betting on Joseph Newgarden on ovals. We also have Scott McLaughlin. There's some drama between the two. You can look at that if you're interested. Search up the Best Bros. He's also a new dad. And this is only his second or third, I believe third year in IndyCar. He came over from racing in Australia and New Zealand. Crazy good. We have Will Power. Will Power is sort of the Fernando Alonso of IndyCar, except he is still much more competitive than Fernando. Not to say Fernando isn't, but the team is much more competitive. He is amazing. He's won championships. He's that guy, to be honest. He's also won an Indy 500. Andretti, you will have also heard of them due to all of their drama trying to get into F1. Now Cadillac has gone into F1, but only after Andretti has dropped their name. It's complicated. We have Colton Herta. You have heard of him. When they were still AlphaTauri, they tried to get him a super license. He didn't get one because they're biased against IndyCar low-key. They should be getting more super license points than they do. Anyway, you've heard of Colton Herta. He's great. He's been up and coming for a few years. We also have Kyle Kirkwood and Marcus Ericsson. Again, you've heard of Marcus Ericsson. He used to race in F1. He was in Sauber. In Meyer Shank Racing, we have Felix Rosenqvist and Marcus Armstrong. You might have heard of Marcus Armstrong. He was in F2 for a couple of years. He's been here. This is his third year in IndyCar, if I'm correct. And if you know Screaming Wheels, that is him. Then in Ed Carpenter Racing, we have Alexander Rossi. He won the Indy 500 in his first year. Crazy. And has been trying to get back there ever since. He just left Arrow McLaren. And he's also beside Christian Rasmussen. Then in Rahal Letterman Lenigan, yes, that is David Letterman, if you aren't curious. They have Graham Rahal, Devlin DeFrancisco, and Lewis Foster. In the Dale Coyne racing cars, we have Jacob Abel. This is his first season. And we have Rinus VeeKay, who has been here for a couple of years. Very big talent. He always is fantastic at the Indy 500. Hoping he will win that one day. Now that you know the teams and drivers, let's get into the championships. So this functions differently from F1. There is a driver's championship, which functions pretty much the same way. Whoever gets the most points as a driver, they win the championship. Now, constructors and team championship is where it differs. There is no constructors championship because it's simply not fair. Some teams have 2 drivers, some teams have 3. It doesn't work out that way. But there's an engine manufacturer's championship. Again, it's only Chevy and Honda. They're pretty much split down the middle. How it works is the bulk of the points come from the drivers and where they finish. So it's like constructors championship in that way. Now let's get into the points, because it is different from F1. In F1, only the top 10 get points. In IndyCar, every single driver gets points each race that they finish. However, I need to clarify that. The drivers get points, of course, yes, but it is also the car that gets points. We'll get into that in a second. So pretty much if you finish a race, you get points. It ranges from 50 to 5. You can also get a point for pole. You can get a point for leading a lap, and you can get 2 points for leading the most laps. So this is where we get into the leaders circle, and this is what is by car and not driver. Essentially what the leader circle is prize winnings you get for finishing in the top 22 cars. We will often get mid-season driver changes based on trying to get the car into the leader circle. It's because it is about $1 million of prize winnings. That is a big deal to the smaller teams. It's sort of, think of it as the Constructors' Championship, how the higher you get, the more prize winnings you get, except it's just a base amount for each team, for each car, sorry, in the leader circle. Now that you know how the championship works, let's get into the car itself. Again, it is a spec series, so they all drive the same chassis. That is the Dallara IR12 chassis, which they've been racing since 2012. I know kind of needs an update. Really does. There have been some changes to the car, but really we should be getting a new chassis, and we will get that in the next couple years, allegedly. Now this car is very sturdy. Let's be clear about that. It is built to race and crash on ovals. They are very sturdy. You don't often see sort of frilly damages in the same way you see in F1. In F1, maybe you're racing a little too close, you take a chunk out of somebody's side pod. That doesn't happen as much in IndyCar. They can race these cars pretty hard beside each other and be completely fine. Now, a big visual difference that you'll see, because the chassis doesn't look too different from a F1 car, but what you will notice is the aero screen. This is the equivalent, same idea as the halo in F1. It is to protect the driver's head. However, it is a full aero screen. It's open on the top. They can get in and out the same, but it prevents any debris from getting in at all. However, this does make the cars very hot. So they do have coolant systems inside their suits and their helmet, which is very interesting. So if you're ever watching IndyCar and you're like, what is on top of their helmet, that weird tube? It's the cooling system. I also want to touch on the liveries in this section because they are different, again, than F1. The liveries are not necessarily team-based. Just because cars are in the same team doesn't mean the cars will look the same. And they change much more often. They are much more sponsor dependent. Sponsors will sponsor the team and also a specific car, and they will want that car to look that way. And just because a team is sponsoring a car does not mean they sponsor that car the whole season. So you'll see somebody racing in one car and it could look different every single race weekend. Sometimes you'll even see the same livery within the team, just on different cars. Like American Legion's a big one. Sometimes that swaps around within the Chip Ganassi team. So if you're ever curious who is racing what, the commentators do a good job at pointing it out. But each weekend there's a spotter guide that is released that will tell you each car and the number. Oh, I also don't know if I remember to say this. It is the cars that are numbered, not the drivers. So Pato O'Ward drives the number 5 McLaren. If he left McLaren, he's not number 5 anymore. Getting into some of the technology, they introduced a hybrid system mid-2024. This functions differently than the F1 hybrid system. It essentially adds horsepower that is limited per lap you can charge and use the battery a certain amount of times per lap. There's a certain energy that you can't overpass, but you can use that at any point in a lap, deploy and or charge the battery whenever you want. But again, there is a limit of how much you can deploy and charge per lap. More to that, but functioning separately, is push to pass. It is the same idea as DRS in the sense that there should be like a certain boost that you can use at different points, but it is different in practice than DRS. It's actually very similar to what F1 is going to start doing in 2026. Essentially what it is a button on the steering wheel that drivers can push. They get X amount of seconds per race, usually about 100. However, they don't have it on ovals. And basically you push the button, you get extra horsepower and you can go faster. There's no restrictions on when you can use this, except for you cannot use it at a safety car restart. Team Penske in St. Petersburg last year. Look into that if you're curious. But you can use it on corners, you can use it on straights. It's not restricted to straights like DRS is. You can use it at any point. You don't even have to be around any other cars, whereas with DRS, you have to be within 1 second of the car in front of you. You could use it to defend, you could use it to overtake, you could use it for literally anything you wanted. You just only have a restricted amount of it. Now, another difference that I think is underappreciated is that IndyCar does not have power steering. What power steering is essentially F1 has it. You're not using all your arm strength to turn the car. It's like when you drive a regular car, you know, you're not using your arm strength to turn the car. That is power steering. IndyCar doesn't have that. So when they are turning the car, they are using literally their strength to turn the car. There's nothing assisting that. That means IndyCar races, is added with the heat from the aero screen, they're exhausting. They're tiring. You'll see IndyCar drivers look much more spent after a race than F1 drivers, and that's not because they're like ill-conditioned or not good drivers. It's literally an entirely different experience. Now that you get an understanding of how the championship works, who's in the championship and all of that, and what the car is, let's get into the calendar. This is the 2025 calendar, and again, they race on ovals, street tracks, and road courses. So in 2025, we have 4 street circuits, 6 road courses, and 7 ovals to make up 17 races. Now that is 10 non-ovals versus 7 ovals. So if you are an F1 fan and you're weary of ovals, there are more non-ovals than there are ovals. So I will say once you get oval racing, it is fun. Now let's get into the race weekend setup. It is not too different from F1. They are 3 practice sessions, however, they are an hour and a half long. 2 are on Friday, 1 is on Saturday before qualifying. There's also a 30-minute warm-up before the race on Sunday. Qualifying is where things get different. Qualifying procedure is different depending on if it is an oval and if it is a road or street track. However, the Indy 500 is also a completely separate thing, so we'll get into that in the Indy 500 video closer to the day. On a road or street circuit, qualifying is similar to F1 in the sense that there are different stages. However, how those sessions work differs a little bit. At first, to start, the cars will be split into 2 and they will each go in their own session, 10 minutes each, and try to get into the top 6 of their session. The top 6 of each session will then come into the Fast 12 where they will battle it out to be in the top 6. And then we get to the Fast 6 where they battle it out for pole. It works similar to F1 in the sense that once you are knocked out, that is your position. You just keep working to build up the positions ahead of that. Ovals is different. You only get 1 go and you get 2 warm-up laps. And on weekends where you only have 1 race, you have your 1 speed lap where you're going fast that is timed, but really not timed. We'll get into that in a second. And wherever you rank in that is where you start the race. That starts in reverse championship order. That doubleheader in Iowa is when you get to do 2 fast laps. The first fast lap counts for the first race. The second fast lap counts for the second race. Now it is not actually timed. Whatever your average speed is how you get ranked by. So it's not by time, it's by speed. And the races are not too different than F1. A big difference is they only have rolling starts in F1. You start, there are the lights, they go and you go from stopped. That never happens in IndyCar. It is always a rolling start, but they still get into a grid formation. It's really interesting to see. You're like, how do they have that much control? It's cool. Check it out if you haven't seen it. It's always a rolling start, so that's a big difference. Another big difference is pit stops and tires. So in IndyCar, there are only 2 types of tires. There is the primaries, which are the harder tires. Those are black. And there are the alternates, which are the softer tires. Those are red. However, they do change every weekend. It's similar to F1 in that sense. In F1, you have your soft, your hard, and your medium. But there is a range of what those could be, and it's different every weekend. It's same in IndyCar. You only have your 2 tires, but what those are change every weekend. There is also the rain tires, but those only come out in the rain. And it is the same in F1 in the sense that you have to use both tires. And again, you get a specific allocation of each type of tire per event. Now, most of the time on ovals, they only have the primary tire. There's been a couple of times where they've tested having alternates as well, but I believe for 2025, it is staying the same of only hards, only the primaries on ovals. So there's no tire changes there. Now, the biggest difference in racing between F1 and IndyCar is that in IndyCar, you have to refuel. So what this looks like is in a pit stop, a driver will come in, stop, they'll get their tires changed, and while that is happening, gas will be hooked up to the car and the car will be refueled. This, to me, is the most interesting aspect of IndyCar because it changes strategy so much. It's not just about tires, it's literally about when are you going to stop, how much are you going to fill in the car, because that takes time, and how much can you save. That's what I said about Scott Dixon. He's a master at fuel saving. No idea how he goes that long without refueling. It's actually absurd. And so that really changes up strategy, and it can get confusing while watching a race, I'll be honest, because you can't tell who has how much fuel. The commentators do a very good job of tracking when did everybody stop, what did they fuel. They will tell you what they think is happening, but it just gives such a fun element because you'll never know if somebody's like, you're never going to know if Scott Dixon's really going to make it that long until he does, right? Until the race is over. It's not like F1 in the sense where you can kind of tell when the race is won after the last pit stop and everybody's like, okay, there's enough of a distance, it's not getting cut off. In F1, in IndyCar, you're racing to the end more often than you're not, to be honest, because of all the strategies that can come from refueling. There are also more pit stops in IndyCar on average than in F1. An IndyCar race will usually, you'll be thinking about, is it 2 or 3 stops, versus an F1, you're thinking, is it 1 or 2 stops? So even that, the number of pit stops makes a big difference because there's a lot of room for changes in pit stops. That is all I'm going to get into today. If you have any more specific questions about IndyCar, let me know and maybe we'll do a part 2 to this. Again, I will do my Indy 500 specific video in April or at the beginning of May, so everybody's ready and prepared for that, because the Indy 500 is the best race of the year. I can't wait. But I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned. I hope, especially if you are an F1 fan coming into IndyCar, this has given you an idea of some of the differences between the series to help you better understand when you watch your first IndyCar race, which should be on March 2nd, St. Pete. Watch it, okay? It's on Fox, on broadcast television. You have no reason not to.